So whether or not the genetic material that created them comes from us or from another race of beings, that is a different question. And I don't have an easy answer to that. I couldn't say that. Back to the conversation we had about, who put us here? Where did we come from?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Clearly the answer to that is that we came from somewhere else, and something else that, if it turned up on the high street today, people would go, it's an alien, because it's alien to us. So I'm not ruling extraterrestrial origins out.
Well, have you ever peered into a skull and wondered what the person it belonged to was like? Researcher and author Mark Olly's latest book is called Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. It's an intriguing title and even more intriguing message, and Mark is joining us now. Hi, Mark, how are you?
Hello, hi.
Good to have you here. Well, the book is really, really interesting, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, and I was just going to ask, firstly, what message you're trying to convey to the reader from the book?
Okay, that's a pretty overarching question. That does cover the entire publication. So I suppose what I'm trying to say, it was written during the 2 years that we were under lockdown with the recent pandemic. And I think it made everybody feel just that little bit more mortal. None of us are going to live forever. A lot of us had to face our demons. A lot of us had to go through hard times, etc. And it got me thinking, as a historian archaeologist, which is what I am, I was thinking, I wonder if humanity's ever been through anything like this before. And if it has, what was the outcome? Where did it take us? So really, in the broadest possible sweep of the brush, that's where the book's going. It goes sort of, it has got a beginning and a middle and an end. And it starts with the oldest version of us, and then it goes through the other versions of us, and then it finishes with what we may become, the us of the future. If it had a single message, if I had to say, was there a single message? Some people found the book a bit pessimistic originally. They thought it was perhaps, talking about, as it says in the subtitle, the end of the world. But, once something ends, then something else begins. So I don't see that end of the world as being a negative or a pessimistic thing. I see it as being whatever comes next. It's the next stage for us. It's the next phase. What has become clear looking at the past is that, there's been some pretty nasty stuff gone on, but we're still here. So although it may be a little pessimistic, there's this enormous message of hope in it that says, we will go on. The end is not the end.
Right.
It's just another beginning. So yeah, I think that pretty well sums it up.
Okay. Well, I must admit, I've caught myself staring into the eye sockets of a skull at a museum for a long time, and I've often wondered, what they were like when they were alive. But can these heads teach us anything?
Again, that's another enormous question. Yes, they teach us a tremendous amount. Keeping with the flow of the book, if you look at the oldest remains, most of them have been turned to stone. So the ability of those individuals to tell us anything is limited by the material that they're preserved from. So you don't really start to get, super duper information until you get to about 40,000-50,000 BC, which in, Earth timescale, geological timescale, that's only yesterday. It's relatively recent times. It's a long way back in archaeology. We don't get many remains from that far back. But over in the Czech Republic, they've got some excavations going over there. They keep finding earlier and earlier and earlier versions of us, modern day humans. So I think we're back to something like 42,000 BC now. Those people have got a tremendous amount to tell us because the remains that they're bringing up have got DNA. So really the key to it is if you get remains that have not been turned to stone, you've got the science, you've got the DNA, you've got the carbon dating. There's more remains that survive along with them. So if you're going down that avenue, then they've got an enormous amount to tell us, tremendous amount, which I do go into in quite great detail in the book. As you start to come more recently, as you start to get to thousands of years rather than tens of thousands. I think the people in more recent times, the message there is that things are not as we would like to imagine them. It's not like a nice, neat, tidy, flow from one thing to another to another to another. It doesn't work like that. It's a mess, basically. Nobody likes a grey area. Nobody likes things to be confused. But that's the message you get from more recent finds. They tend to upset the apple cart a bit. What we're doing now, the message we're going to send out to people in the future, that's going to be a very different message, because we're tinkering with some of the science and we're doing things now that they haven't been able to do for quite a considerable amount of time. So what message that sends out to people in the future, I don't know. I suppose if we cock it up and the whole thing goes bang, then that's going to be a particularly negative message, So yes, they've got a lot to tell us.
Yeah. So give us an example of what you mean by a grey area.
Okay. You're going to like this one. I think this is probably a good example for the American continents. If you go to South America, you have a look at the skulls of the Paracas, which I do in various parts of the book. We look at these guys with enormous heads and what have you. They're still at the cutting edge side of looking at the DNA. But what's happening is it's becoming very quickly apparent from the DNA that the origins of this particular human species is not in America. It's over in the East. So you've got some form of migration that's happened in the distant past, or not so distant past, where these guys with enormous heads have actually migrated from the Middle East and from Turkey and North Africa and the areas sort of surrounding Egypt and all that sort of neck of the woods, if you like, the furthest reaches of the Mediterranean. They seem to have somehow got from there to the South American continent. Now, traditionalists in the archaeological community in America will now be chewing their knuckles, because that's not the sort of thing they really want to hear. That, all those thousands of years ago, there were other races that made it over there. I mean, now as we are coming into the sort of the second decade of the 21st century, there's a lot of information coming out where, people cross the ice sheets into North America, early on in prehistory. The Native American DNA is proving to have at least one tribe there that have got origins over in the West. And then over here, we've got people like the Irish in the medieval times going across the other way. You've got the Vikings going across the other way, and all this kind of archaeology now has become accepted. It's become more acceptable in recent times. But when I was training in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, if you talked about anything like this, people, the American archaeological community were not really receptive. That's the term I'd use. Not really receptive to this kind of information. So when you start looking at that, it's hard science, it's hard fact, it's there in the DNA analysis. You can't run away from it. That's what these guys are made of, and that's how it's beginning to look to us now. But that is a prime example of how these surviving human remains have really changed the way we think about things. It's topical as well, because obviously the remains are South American.
Yeah, and I guess what would confuse people is when you talk about discovering giant heads and then referring to them as human. I mean, were they human?
Yes, you've got to take another step to arrive at that, because the community now that are looking at that, the science community, use a term which I've quoted in the book, I think. They call it a Lord of the Rings type world in the past. And it's beginning to emerge now quite graphically that whereas, for example, if you looking at the cat, there are tiny cats that will sit in the palm of your hand, all the way up to a thing called a liger, which is a lion and tiger combined, which is almost the size of a horse. And there are all these variations and all the sizes in between. And they all have DNA markers built onto a basic structure for a cat. Now that's perfect nature, normal science. But the same thing seems to have been true of the human race in the past. So you've got a basic formula, a basic structure for human DNA. And then bits within that structure are different. They alter. So like you've got the Floors pygmy people, the little hobbit people that were found fairly recently. They have full-blown adult, DNA. They are just different. They're tiny. They don't get bigger than about 3'6". And then at the other extreme, you've got lots and lots of examples over the years of people who've attained heights of giants. I think Robert Wadlow was the most famous giant most people will know about. He grew to about 9'11", so he was huge. That is a growth disorder. But then the question is, where does that disorder come from? Is it a mutation? Is it something, you know, that's failed in his DNA? Or is it something left over from, say, a race of giants that lived back in biblical times or earlier? Because there's plenty of evidence for people being giant. And these guys with the weird heads, with the enormous heads, the South American guys, are, again, it's the basic human DNA structure, but with alterations, with differences that cause the heads to grow in a different way and for the brains to develop in a different way. So again, back to, you know, what do these human remains tell us? They're beginning to open up this Lord of the Rings type world, and basically at the end of the day, we're just the leftovers. I hate to say this, but you know, we are the survivors of whatever that amazing world must have been, you know, in the past.
Yeah. Does research indicate why, you know, the different style of humans, and when I say style, you know, size-wise, why they died out and why we survived?
I'm going ahead of the research, so I'm going to give you something here that's a little bit cutting edge. I don't think anyone's actually stuck the neck out all the way and said this, but I'm going to say it with absolute confidence, and that is that the human race has not avoided the catastrophes that have happened in the past. So in the same way as we've got layers of different fossils from different, you know, floods, meteorite impacts, comet explosions, you name it, whatever's come along, whatever disaster has taken out a particular part of that species, we have definitely been a part of that. You know, we ourselves have been reduced by what the world is doing and what nature is doing. That will be, because like I say, I don't think anybody else has said it yet, but that will be the conclusion that I feel this DNA analysis and the looking at different species, that's where it's going to end up. That's going to be the conclusion. It's inevitable. A lot of the book is a little bit matter of fact, and it's just, it is a matter of fact that, you know, we've lost so much of the diversity, the biodiversity, that of course we're going to be a victim of that. You know, we're going to suffer the same kind of things happening to us. So yeah, I think, you know, I mean, if you're a giant, you're absolutely enormous giant human being, you're going to need a certain environment, a certain amount of resources to sustain you. If those resources and that environment changes, then the term that we use is natural selection is going to take that particular species out. The really sad thing is the guys in South America with the enormous heads, they were taken out by the illness and the disease that the Spanish took across there and the Europeans took across there. So in a sense, yes, it was natural selection, but we only lost them about 500 or 600 years ago. So they were here. We had them, you know, till such recent times. That's the shame of it. You know, they've become a victim of sort of post-glacial, post-ice age, you know, selection, but at an extremely late date. You know, it's a real shame that we've lost them. I'm talking about the natural genetic stretched heads, not the artificial ones, because human beings have tried to copy it. So there probably is some guy walking around out there, you know, with a head that's twice the size it should be, but I'm not necessarily going to say that's genetic. That could be something that's been made that way. But yeah, we've only lost them really recently. You know, we're not talking about dinosaur kind of timescales here. So it's a real shame.
I guess the big question is how did we get here? I mean, how did we land on this perfect planet and the perfect distance from the sun?
Do you know what? I'm absolutely starting to love your questions because they're amazing. You really are getting to the core of what the book's all about. There's only two alternatives, you know, either somehow we evolved, so we started off as something else and then finished up like this, or we started off like this. In other words, we were put here. You know, you don't really have any other alternatives. Even theories like panspermia, etc., panspermia, where you've got something coming from elsewhere that lands here and then develops. it still includes evolution. So that's still essentially an evolutionist theory, unless the panspermia is quite literally, an alien race arriving on a spacecraft and starting the whole thing off complete. Wham, there it goes. That's different. That's not evolutionary. So you can mix and match some of the ideas. In the book, what I go with is a sort of recreation theory, if you like, where as much as everything goes south, because obviously everything decays, as much as that happens, I think it repeats. I think that's a repeating cycle. Right. So I do think there's been super races and advanced races in the past. I have no problem with that at all. And they've all suffered a fate. And then we've started again and we've moved on. Lower down, lesser than we were previously, but nevertheless, we've still managed to develop on. So it's a number of different things. But if you really, really want me to nail the colours to the mast, I think we were put here. In terms of where the planet is in the Goldilocks zone, where it's the ideal environment, you've got to look at the mechanisms of what's happening out in the universe to get to that, as to how it kind of arrived where it is. There's a huge amount of intelligent structure and mathematics and what have you going on in the background. So it kind of looks like it was made that way. And then we arrived and we were put onto it. That's how it appears. I'm not following any particular path. I'm not supporting any particular religious view or scientific view. All I'm saying is that, as you rightly say in the question, I suppose, inevitably we have to come from somewhere. There has to be a starting point. I think the challenge in the book is that the starting point doesn't have to be evolution. I think everybody automatically goes to that. That's the default setting. Oh, yeah, we evolved, we came out of slime or whatever. No, DNA is slowly undermining that. In fact, actually, it's quite quickly undermining that. It doesn't look like that's how everything was made, how we came about, because the DNA structure is mind-boggling, and the more we've understood about structures and computers and, the way things are put together, the more complex and the more complicated DNA is getting. And it's not something that happens by accident. There's got to be some kind of design behind all that. If you want me to guess as to who put us here, that's a different question, and I'm really not sure I could go down that avenue. But there you go.
Well, because I was going to kind of ask, how much credence you put in the stories from various people around the world that, were visited by extraterrestrials and were told that yes, we're the ones who put you here, and we've been away for a long time, but we're coming back, and we want you to prepare and spread the message around the world. Is that something that you'd give credence to?
I wouldn't rule it out as a possibility. That's the avenue I'd come from. Because I'm an archaeologist, I'm very almost materialistic in the way I look at things. So it's got to be hard physical evidence that you can then match up with, whatever the facts are. But in that sense, I'm also not closed-minded. I'm not, shuttered into thinking in only one direction or on only one theory. I try to encompass as much as I possibly can. So taking that avenue, yes, it's very possible that who or what put us here eventually will come back. I think the implication at the end of the book actually is that if things get really bad, if we get to the point where the planet has devolved so far, I think the implication is they will come back, or it will come back, because whatever is going on here will have run its course. Everything has an end, everything has a conclusion. So I don't have a problem with that. I think in the book as well, I touch on the idea that supposing whatever it is that made us, which is a fair supposition, is way above us, way above our understanding, way above the thing that it actually made, because at the end of the day, everything that we're dealing with here are things that have been made. If that thing is way, way, way above that, then it's out of time, it's out of space, it's possibly out of our dimension. If it's got the ability to bounce around in time, then turning up now might be the logical thing to do. Even if we as a species, one of our civilizations in the distant past, even if they managed to crack the problems of time and space, I would not necessarily think it was unusual for them to come back at this point in history. You know, if I was looking down the timeline and I was thinking, oh, you know, when's a good time to go, hi, we're back, you know, now might not be a bad time to do that. So yes, it makes sense. It does make sense. And that particular theory actually covers a huge number of encounters of all different kinds, because they're not necessarily coming from Venus or Mars. You
Yeah.
know, they could actually be coming, they might be us, they might be a different species of us, but they're coming from the past forward or the future back. Or if you don't have time, then they're not doing either. They're just going from where they are to where we are. But they do seem to be appearing more frequently. You've also got to bear in mind, though, as well, that in this sort of day and age, a lot of things are pointing at the sky, and a lot of people are looking at the sky.
Mm-hmm.
So the number of encounters, the number of sightings, etc., of course, they're going to go up, because that's the sort of thing people are looking for. I've got, you know, reports going back hundreds of years. As an archaeologist, things have been bobbing about in the sky for hundreds of years. They just didn't have the ability to observe and record the way that we have now. So you've always got to bear that in mind. That's why there's an increase in what we're seeing and what's being recorded.
Yeah, yeah, we're living in both exciting times and, I guess, frightening times. And Elon Musk, for example, is building spaceships to get the human race off the planet, because he doesn't believe that we will exist in our present form as far away as 2050. And
wow,
that's amazing. You know, that's I mean, and then you fast forward 400 or 500 years, and an archaeologist discovers skulls, you know, in that time, and then suddenly they say, well, this skull's a little bit different than the one that was discovered back in the 1900s or whatever. It seems to have a little bit of machinery attached to it.
Yeah, it makes me chuckle to think that, you know, in 100 years' time, we're going to have, you know, pre-Elon and post-Elon. That could actually be a time period, you know, that could actually happen. I've got an enormous amount of respect for Elon Musk, I've got to say. You know, he's pushing into such amazing areas on every front. 90% of the time, I think he's dead right. But as just based on what I know and what I've observed, I'm not sure about firing things off the planet.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I nail my colours to the mast in the book on. I think trying to get off this ball, getting out past the Van Allen belts and, you know, off into cosmic radiation, I think certainly up to this point we've been a long way off achieving that. If Elon comes up with some way of protecting whatever it is he's sending out there, and he can get it through those difficulties and through those obstacles, then he's in with a fighting chance. And knowing how he's done things and the way he's progressing, there's a good possibility that's where he's going to end up. I'm just praying like mad that he doesn't go down the NASA moon landing route. You know, I think anybody who's listening out there will understand what I mean by that. What we've had reported back to us is demonstrably not whatever it was they did back then. You know, there were other things going on back then.
Yeah.
You know, what the public knows is not, it doesn't fit, you know, it's not comfortable. So as long as he doesn't go down that route, as long as NASA don't sort of, you know, blanket bomb him with cover up, it'd be nice to see where he goes. It would be really nice to see where he goes.
You talk, and you may have already touched on this, but you talk about that a few grains of sand revolutionized civilization. So what did you mean by this?
Okay, that's another storming question. You know, I love it when interviewers do the research. It's just brilliant. Well, it's the zip line, isn't it? I mean, you've hit the subtitle there, because it's crystal skulls and human heads. That's one topical aspect of it, and then underneath it's the mystical history of glass and the end of the world. So we kind of ticked off the end of the world. So this is the mystical history of glass. That's that bit. Well, I started off, that's the middle chapters of the book. When I'm looking at crystal skulls, I mean, the obvious question is why? You know, why make them out of crystal? Why does anybody bother with it, you know? And very, very quickly into that particular avenue of research, I realized that the crystal side of it actually is of paramount importance to understanding what's going on here on planet Earth. If you don't grasp the kind of the part that silicon plays in our day-to-day existence, then the wow factor, the kind of, if you like, the meaty bits of the book get lost. You know, they disappear. So I sort of really ploughed into that, and I mean, silicon's everywhere. You know, it's in microchips, it's in windows, it's in sand, it's in building material. You know, you can buy it in a tube and seal your bath with it. It's in the lenses of your glasses. Coincidentally, they're made from silicon. It's in absolutely everything. The biggest wow factor was once I started researching where that relates to the human head. I struggled a bit, but I thought, let's have a look and see what part silicon plays in the human body. Now, on a day-to-day basis, you've got hundreds of trace elements flowing around the body. They don't really amount to something unique. But in the part of human development, silicon, if you have a deficiency of silicon, affects the human brain. So as the baby's growing, as the human being's growing, if you don't have enough silicon, the brain, which is the computer, the bit that, you know, runs us and rules us and we experience everything through, that bit doesn't turn out right. So I looked at that and I thought, how on earth did people in the past know that? Because that's one of the many reasons why they ended up defaulting to silica. A few of the other reasons, I mean, one of the biggest ones, I suppose, is if you try and model planet Earth, you try to look at how the Earth spins and you try and computer model that. Everybody for years just thought, oh yeah, you know, we're a giant like lump of iron, you know, with magnetic and electrical forces, and we're spinning through the universe as this big lump of iron. But as soon as we could computer model this, they came up with this thing called Olson's paradox, which is if you put the wrong thing in, you get the wrong planet out. It doesn't work. So you stick a huge iron core in there and it's rubbish, absolutely rubbish. The whole thing just falls apart. The way to solve Olson's paradox, was only discovered fairly recently, is to put quartz silica in. And they can be so specific that they think that the quartz silica is actually amethyst. They think that the core of the planet is liquid amethyst or liquid silica crystal. Again, it's another wow factor. So the thing we regard as the center of us, which is the brain that's the center of what we are, requires the same thing that the planet Earth also has as its central core and its central mass. So if you like, we're carbon life forms, but we're literally living in a silicon world. So as soon as you get that, so many pieces just fall into place, you know, because in the past, I mean, I do a section in the book on Celtic heads to try and get over the fact that in the past, the spiritual core, the spirit, if you like, the experiential part of the being is regarded as the head. Hence, they came up with this idea of the green man. The green man represents the same thing in planet Earth. It's the spirit of life, the soul, etc., for planet Earth. So you've got crystal planet, crystal skull. You know, somebody made that link somewhere in the distant past. How on earth, you know, you knew that, I don't know. Glass has been around a long time. It has been around many, many thousands of years. And they've been melting sand to produce it. So they were aware of this idea of what glass was. But it's got so many qualities. I mean, I could do a whole interview just based on that one chapter because there's so much in that.
Yeah. You list a total of 8 heads from ancient to alien in the book. Is there one more important than the other?
Now then, do you mean actual existing surviving remains of things like crystal skulls?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah.
Yes, you do. The number of crystal skulls out there. Yeah, some of them. I think some of them are more important than others because on one extreme, I think you've got the Mitchell Hedges skull, which is the very, very famous one. That one has had the electron microscopy, I'll say it, electron microscopy done on it, which means that they've gone all over the surface looking for manufacturing marks. And it appears there isn't a scratch on it. So you've got a mystery there straight away. How on earth was that made? It was definitely not made by a machine. If it was made by hand, whoever did it knew precisely what they were doing. And I'm inclined to believe that the finder, who was Anna Mitchell Hedges, I believe her story. And I think she genuinely did find that under an altar in Aztec and Mayan territory. if you go to the Aztec and Mayan territory, you've then got to say to yourself, is there anything out there that we can say for certainty is archaeologically correct? And there are at least 2 skulls, but only 2, where you can actually say that that's where they come from. One of them is in the center of the ballpark at Koba, and that's a milky white skull, and that's part of the structure. So it's always been there. So however old that ballpark is in Koba, that's the age of the skull. And we know it was made by Aztecs and Mayans, more likely Mayans in Koba. So we know that one's real. And then there was another one turned up at an archaeological site that was what they call portable. So it sits in the hand. It's not huge, but it's reasonable. That went into the archaeological records for the village they were excavating close to Mexico City. That's recorded. But what's happening now over there is that they are closing ranks with respect to crystal skulls. Obviously, so many of them have been taken out of the country or stolen, even from museum storerooms. I'd imagine that these things have been picked up and taken. So they're closing ranks. So it's hard to find where that one physically came from. They're not releasing the dig site. But I know as an archaeologist within the community that was a genuine find. It was genuinely recorded. So there are 2 of them. Then you've got the rest of them.
Yeah.
The jury's out a bit on some of them. There's a couple in Paris in museums there. There's the one in the British Museum. People think that a lot of them go back to a dealer who was in Paris, who was selling imported antiquities from South America, and they think that's where all these skulls go back to, because they can find tool marks on them and they can trace paper trails back to this one particular dealer. Well, all that proves really is that they were sold. It doesn't prove where the dealer was getting them from.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, once you get back to this dealer, everything else that he ever sold, all the other artifacts, came from South America. So in a worst case scenario, somebody out there in South America made these skulls and sold them to him. So in that sense, you could claim that they're fakes, but they're not, because obviously they're real skulls. They're obviously a few hundred years old, if not slightly older. And they obviously come from South America, because everything this guy was selling came from South America. That's unfortunately where the trail on those goes cold, because then trying to get a date on stone is nigh on impossible. It's really, really difficult to do. Yeah, really difficult to do. And anything now from the 20th or the 21st century, especially late 20th century, there are literally tens of thousands of these skulls out there now. So it's getting impossibly difficult to sort out the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
But if you can trace a skull back a few generations, and you can trace it back to South America, and it's life size and it's handmade, so it's not machine made, then you might be on a safe bet. That's a fairly safe bet that it's genuine. Otherwise, difficult. They definitely had them, and they were definitely working stone and had an obsession with skulls, in pre-Columbian times, before Cortes got out there and everything. So before the 14 and 1500s, they were definitely doing things that, could produce crystal skulls. But at the moment, like I say, archaeologists in that neck of the woods are being very, very quiet about any that turn up. Very quiet indeed.
Yeah. Talk about the last one, alien heads, and I guess that's what this audience would be interested in. What did they tell us about our future?
Wow. Well, let me start off by saying the assumption has been, probably since the days Eric von Daniken put one of these in one of his books, the assumption's been that these things are extraterrestrial. The DNA and the biology and the archaeology, which I find even more amazing, is actually not showing that. They're not extraterrestrials. They are a different version of us, and that takes you down an utterly amazing avenue, really amazing avenue. There have been other skulls that have come out, like the Star Child and one or two others that do resemble aliens. But nearly always, if there's a DNA test, it's coming back as a variety of human, or a human with something that's essentially wrong with them, if you view it that way. Ruling that out, taking those out of the equation, you've then got to say evidence. You're back to your evidence again. My own feelings are that if we do end up with greys, the traditional aliens with the long arms and all the rest of it, it makes me wonder if they haven't been genetically engineered to fit the craft that they fly. So whether or not the genetic material that created them comes from us or from another race of beings, that is a different question. And I don't have an easy answer to that. I couldn't say that. Back to the conversation we had about, who put us here? Where did we come from? Well, clearly the answer to that is that we came from somewhere else, and something else that, if it turned up on the high street today, people would go, it's an alien, because it's alien to us. So I'm not ruling extraterrestrial origins out. I'm just saying at the moment we're in a really difficult position because we don't have the hard evidence. We don't have bodies, we don't have DNA material. In fact, it's really hard to get hold of physical crash debris and things like that as well. That's extremely hard to get hold of. Somebody somewhere doesn't really want you to know what's going on there quite clearly. So the answer is, what shaped head, I suppose, does an alien have? I don't know. That's the honest answer. I don't know. I'm really not sure.
Yeah, but it could also tell us that, those alien heads, that the DNA is saying they're human. So maybe it's telling us that what put us here is basically us in a futuristic form.
Back to the idea of time travel, interdimensional travel. It's I said this in another interview, it made the guy chuckle, that it's a bit like Star Trek. Every alien that turns up on Star Trek's got a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a body, because that's all we could do. So it's just funny that all the Greys and all the aliens and all the encounters have got a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a body. So the same rationale applies. Obviously there's a connection. They don't appear as jellyfish or ostriches or birds, whatever. They're coming as us. So there has to be a connection. There must be a connection there. The question is that connection extraterrestrial or is it terrestrial? And I don't have an easy answer for that. Maybe some guy that works at Area 51 does, but I don't.
Well, who knows?
Who knows?
Mark, back to talking about the future and what we'll look like or whether we'll be here, but do you think we're headed for extinction as a race, based on any evidence that's been collected over the years with these skulls?
It goes back, all the way back, I think, to where we came in at the beginning. And that's where previous races, if you like, have bowed out. So the real question is, are we going to bow out? Denisovans bowed out, Neanderthals bowed out, Pracus bowed out, giants went, pygmies went, everything went, they all disappeared. I feel as if it's inevitable that at some point we will go the same way as all things. It will get to a point where there'll be so few of us that survive. I mean, I know they're panicking like mad now because we're breeding like rats and we're ending up everywhere. But the other thing it shows as well is that it may not be at our own hands. When I went to South America, I visited the Yucatan Peninsula, and the Gulf of Mexico is a socking great impact crater from a meteorite. Now, most of the geologists now are starting to lean in the direction of that being the dinosaur killer, because the fallout from that, there's a big layer, burnt layer in fossil records, and it looks like it just went ba-boom, and that was that. And a lot of the species didn't survive the nuclear winter that followed. But then, even more recent than that, they got the data back from the American Antarctica survey, where you guys had gone all the way across Antarctica. You'd gone through the ice and had a look at what was underneath. And when all the data got collated back again, there's an even bigger crater, another socking great crater sat right underneath the Antarctic ice sheets. So you think, okay, well, if nothing else, it shows we're not immune. There is a good chance that something might hit us. And then the question then is not so much what that's going to destroy. The question is what is actually going to survive this time round, because it's not a first time event. It's not a unique event. Personally, I'd like to think it was us. I'd like to think we made it onto the next one. Whether or not we do, I don't know. I can't see us getting hit by anything anytime soon either, because these events are far apart, really,
Yeah.
really far apart. You never know. Elon might stick a satellite up there that can shoot one of these things down. You never know.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Why are we such a divided species?
I do touch on that in the book, and I'm really pleased that you've picked up on that. We are the sort of species that seems to build our opinions on faulty data. In other words, we don't see the world as it really is and in complete form. I think that possibly is going to be the biggest fault of Homo erectus, which is the surviving species as we are now. You know, if there's an excuse to fall out with the guy next door, we seem to be experts at finding that excuse and then falling out over something. And the whole way that humanity's going now, coming out of the pandemic, the various wars and conflicts and what have you that's going around the world, we all need to just say, hang on a minute, whoa, what is this doing? What is the outcome of this? Where is this taking us? And I think we sort of need to change our approach. I mean, I say in the book, I actually wonder if these guys, the Paracas, with the enormous brain capacity they had, I wonder if they realized that they were going extinct. And because they had no fear of death and they understood so much more than we understood and where they were going, they just allowed that to happen because they realized they couldn't fight it. It was inevitable. So the intelligent thing to do was to just say, well, let's make the best of it while we can. But we don't seem to have that capacity. I don't get it. Why are we constantly trying to kill each other and capture each other? And we don't even need to fight for survival. We've got enough resources. There's, if you go down the monetary route, there's more than enough money to fix this place and get us back on our feet again. So I'm really, really pleased you picked up on that in the book, because the book is collaborative. It does try to point out that we shouldn't be nitpicking people's differences. It doesn't really matter whether the other guy's bright green and he's got two heads. We should be asking questions like, what is that person capable of? What can they do that we can't do? If it becomes a team effort, I think we've got everything we need. We've got all that we need to survive and get through everything that even like things like the pandemic, we got through that. But it's only going to happen when people start working together and not, having a disagreement because he wants that piece of land, but he speaks a different language, and the guy over there's got, is a different color, and the guy over there's a different size, and doesn't think like you. All these differences somehow we genuinely, I mean, it's an old message, but with a new twist, we genuinely need to get through this now more than ever, at this point in time more than ever.
Yeah. But do you think we can when, the different cultures around the world are all mesmerized by their own religious beliefs? And I guess religion is the big bugbear in the whole thing.
It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. I'll qualify that. I think the core of most of the beliefs that humanity has had almost for thousands of years, I think the core remains the same. Either, you believe in something or you don't. And if you do believe in something, the ingredients of that very often are the same. And I think higher up in these various religious, go wherever you want, Islam, Catholicism, Christianity, paganism, witches, wizards, whatever, wherever you decide to go, I think the core beliefs now, because of things like the internet, people are realizing that those beliefs can be lined up. I'd imagine somebody who's really, really hardcore High Church of England over here, which is virtually Catholic, is not going to fall out with some little witch down in Cornwall who wants to save Cornwall from environmental destruction. They have so much in common and they're working for a common goal, a lot to do with humanity as well, to do with, how we get through things, how we survive, protecting children, looking after each other in medical ways, all this sort of thing. There's so much going on that all of the religions now have got this sort of thing in common. I think what we struggle with is how extreme some of them can be. Some of the branches of these religions can be really, really extreme. But again, some of it's human frustration. You know, if you've got something you believe is entirely the truth, but nobody's going to listen to you. Every time you post something on Facebook, you know, Zuckerberg and Meta take it off.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that, you know, you're going to get frustrated. You know, that is not the way forward. And it's back to the human differences. Again, we need to listen to what these people and what these religions and these paths have got to contribute. Don't look at the negatives, look at the positives, you know, and see where that goes. I mean, I've never yet met anyone who is a believer who doesn't believe in something divine.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I've never met anybody who's a complete and utter non-believer, a total atheist, who doesn't understand and appreciate the basic principles of science. And somewhere in that, it marries up, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I hope the book's a comfortable marriage of those two, you know, avenues. I'd like to think it reconciles some of it. But yeah, I mean, again, back to human differences. You know, the minute you mention anything, you know, oh, it's Noah's Ark, you know, or whatever, boom, everybody's onto you. Then, oh, you can't use that; it's biblical nonsense. You know, it's.
Yeah.
But the same thing applies to anything. You can use an Inuit, you know, an Eskimo proverb or an Eskimo story, and they go, it's just legend. You know, it's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you know, myth. Well, everything's myth. You pick any religion you like, it's all myth. You know, where do you go with that? That is just not a good argument. You know, so it's things like that we need to push past. We really need to push past.
Well, I mean, the times are pretty perilous at the moment with what's going on, but do you think an alien spacecraft landing on the White House lawns or any other famous landmark around the world would be enough to unite us?
It'll unite us, but I'm not quite sure in what. I think part of the planet would be united in optimistic, you know, hope, and half of the planet would probably want to drop a bomb on it and get rid of it before it posed a threat. And then there's all the shades in between.
Mm-hmm.
Many moons ago, I knew a person who was a channeler. And the only reason I'm quoting her is because she made notes. She wrote stuff down. Some of the stuff she came out with was just way beyond her. So I think she was getting something from somewhere. And what she said, which I thought was very wise, was be very careful, because sooner or later, you probably will end up with a spaceship landing on the White House lawn. What she said is that some of the world leaders will bring out the greys. You know, they'll bring them out and go, hey, look, you know, look what I've got here. Here's one of those aliens. The aliens that were talking to her were saying, don't believe it. So if you believe that the aliens that are being channeled through are genuine, the aliens themselves are saying, look, these guys, these grey things are going to turn out to be fakes. So don't fall for it when they first come out. Sit back, relax, watch, see what happens, because sooner or later, the real guys are coming. And I think that will speak to, there's going to be loads of people who watch this who are channelers, psychics, people who are into that whole spiritual side of ufology. And they're all going to go, yes, that is precisely what we're all expecting to happen. So yeah, I think something probably will come down one day and land on the White House lawn, but you know, I think it's going to be a Mars attacks moment more than anything else. I'm not sure it's not going to be anything from another dimension. It's just going to be Hollywood, I think, doing what it does best. I certainly would reserve judgment. I'd wait. I'd do exactly that piece of advice. I'd sit back and wait to see where it went. That's my advice.
Okay. All right. One final question. So what would be the Mark Olly fix? What would you do if you were given carte blanche to steer us to safety?
Oh gosh, that's if I ruled the world. Wow, what a question. What would I do? Do you know, I'd take my own advice. I genuinely think I would take my own advice, and I would search the world to try to find the people who were the best at whatever it was they did. You know, I would do what generations of kings and rulers and people have done in the past, and I would try to surround myself with truthful, reliable, and extremely well-informed advisors. And that's how I'd start, but I'd try to do it without the prejudice that I mentioned earlier in the interview. I'd try and just go everywhere. Doesn't matter who they were, where they came from, you know, what you'd finish up with, I suppose, would be a genuine version of the United Nations. You wouldn't finish up with politicians and people with vested interests and money and all the rest of it. If you want something sorted out, you go to the experts in that particular field. So I would certainly start by doing that, and I would try to combine within that, whatever, call it Star Wars Supreme Council. I'd try to combine a fairly even-handed number of those with religious and spiritual interests and those with scientific and planetary interests. The overarching banner, though, for the whole thing, it would have to rely on truth and fact. None of this making rubbish up and PR and unfortunately Hollywood would be out of a job. I wouldn't have any of that involved. It's time to get real. That would be my solution. I think that would be the way forward. And I wouldn't try and unite people. I think I mentioned it in the book, or maybe I don't actually. If you try to get everybody to function together on the same page, all you've done is dilute them down to the lowest common denominator. So that definitely doesn't work. That really is not the way forward. What you have to do is accept them on face value and take them full on 100% as they are and say, what do they have to offer? That's got to be the way forward. We're too good at standardization. That's one of the curses of the human race. You can't deal with it, you can't cope with it, you can't understand it. Right, we'll standardize it. That's not the way forward.
Okay.
So yeah.
So the book is called Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. It's available at all good outlets, I guess. Amazon primarily.
Yeah, Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got a follow-up coming up?
I am working on a follow-up. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this because I don't know. Should I? It's an odd one. Okay, it's an odd one. It's not quite the same as this. The one I've actually just completed. I've spent 44 years researching King Arthur as a subject, and I think I've arrived at a point with a readable, accessible, publicly understandable book that actually nails it. So what I've tried to do is come up with a life story for Merlin, for Joseph of Arimathea, and for King Arthur, and produce it as a book. As it stands, it's about 470 odd pages long, with photographs and illustrations. I mean, this one's just around 100, so it's about 4 times the size of this. But I am absolutely desperate to get that into print because it's taken so long for it to come together. It's my pet project, if you like. I started it I think it was 1977 when I started it, so it's a long time ago. And I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it in print. And it's interesting. There's some stuff in there that is a bit world changing and is a bit revolutionary, and it's every bit as radical as this, if not more so, but in different ways. So maybe that's coming out next. I don't know. I'm also working with a channel over here. There's a company called Zohar Entertainment, and we're working together to try and get internet media out there, because in that respect I'm a little bit behind the times. I mean, I've done television and all that kinds of nonsense, but I'd like to do a little bit more that's accessible on the internet and on the World Wide Web. So at the moment it's very much in its infancy. I'm just pushing into that now, so hopefully this year you'll see a lot more material coming out.
Okay, Mark, look forward to your next project, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and there's a world exclusive to end on.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's Mark Olly joining us today.